The evening sky turned a deep orange as the sun began to set over the city. It was a Saturday night, and the most talked about event of the season was about to begin. Marcus Wellington, a billionaire businessman known across the country for his wealth and power, was hosting a grand party at his enormous mansion on the hill. The mansion was a sight to behold, with its tall white columns, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors that sparkled under the golden lights. Luxury cars lined the long driveway as guests arrived one by one, dressed in their finest clothes. Expensive jewelry glittered on the necks and wrists of elegant ladies. While men wore tailored suits that cost more than most people earned in a year, the air was filled with laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the sweet smell of roses that decorated every corner of the ballroom. Marcus Wellington stood near the center of the grand hall, greeting his guests with a confident smile. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He had built his fortune from nothing, and he was proud of his success. Tonight was special for him, not just because of the party, but because he had planned something unusual, something that would give his guests a story to tell for years to come. In the middle of the ballroom sat a magnificent grand piano. Its polished black surface reflected the lights above like a mirror, and its keys were as white as fresh snow. This was no ordinary piano. It was a rare instrument, one of only a few in the world, handcrafted by master artisans and worth more than a small house. As more guests arrived and the party grew livelier, Marcus walked to the piano and tapped a crystal glass with a silver spoon. The sound rang out across the room, and slowly, everyone stopped talking and turned to look at him. He smiled and raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me tonight," he began, his voice strong and clear. "I hope you are all enjoying yourselves. But I have a special announcement to make, something I think you will find quite entertaining." The guests leaned in with curiosity, wondering what the billionaire had in mind. Marcus gestured toward the beautiful piano behind him. "As you can see, I have brought out my most prized possession, this magnificent piano tonight. I want to offer a challenge to all of you." He paused for effect, letting the silence build anticipation. "If anyone here can sit at this piano and play something that truly moves me, something that touches my heart and shows real talent, I will grant them a wish. Perhaps a business opportunity, perhaps a generous gift, or perhaps something even more valuable," the crowd murmured with excitement. Some guests whispered to each other, while others laughed nervously. A few people clapped their hands, thinking it was all in good fun. Marcus continued, "But let me warn you. I have heard the greatest pianists in the world play. I have attended concerts in Vienna, Paris, and New York. My standards are very high. So if you think you can impress me, please, step forward and try." At first, no one moved. The guests looked at each other, some smiling with embarrassment, others shaking their heads. Then, a young woman in a red dress stepped forward. She was the daughter of a famous lawyer, and she had taken piano lessons as a child. She sat down at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The music was pleasant enough, a simple classical piece that most people recognized. But after only a minute, it was clear she was nervous. Her fingers stumbled over the notes, and she played too softly when she finished. The guests clapped politely, but Marcus simply smiled and shook his head. "Thank you for trying, my dear, but that will not do," he said kindly. A middle-aged businessman tried his luck. He had once played in a band during his college years, and he thought he could impress the crowd with a popular tune. But his playing was clumsy and out of rhythm. Some guests tried not to laugh, and Marcus raised his hand to stop him halfway through. "Thank you, but no," Marcus said. "Next. Please." One by one, several more guests attempted the challenge. Some played children's songs, others tried to show off with fast notes but made many mistakes. Each time, Marcus listened patiently, but each time he was not impressed. The guests began to realize that this challenge was harder than they thought, and soon fewer people were willing to try. As the evening went on, the party returned to its usual rhythm. People ate delicious food, danced to music from a live band, and talked about business and gossip. The piano sat silent in the corner, a reminder of the challenge that no one had been able to win. Some guests joked about it, saying that Marcus had set an impossible task just to amuse himself. Others admired the piano from a distance. Too afraid to even touch it, Marcus himself seemed satisfied. He moved through the crowd, shaking hands and making small talk, but there was a look in his eyes that suggested he had expected more. He had hoped someone would surprise him, but so far no one had. What none of the guests knew was that the most surprising moment of the night was yet to come, and it would come from someone they had barely noticed at all. The party continued late into the night, and the grand ballroom buzzed with energy and laughter. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved gracefully between guests, carrying silver trays filled with champagne glasses and delicate appetizers. The crystal chandeliers above cast a warm glow over everything, making the room feel like something from a fairy tale. But while the wealthy guests enjoyed themselves, there was another world happening quietly in the background, a world that most of them never noticed or cared about. Samuel Carter moved through the shadows of the great mansion, pushing his cleaning cart slowly and carefully. He was a janitor, one of several staff members working that night to keep everything perfect for Marcus Wellington's important guests. Samuel was a black man in his early 60s, with gray hair at his temples and kind eyes that had seen many years of hard work. He wore a simple gray uniform with his name tag pinned to his chest, and he carried himself with quiet dignity, even though most people looked right through him as if he were invisible. To the wealthy guests, Samuel was just part of the furniture, someone to be ignored or occasionally ordered around. As Samuel cleaned near the entrance to the ballroom, he could hear the sounds of the party, the music, the laughter, and the conversations about money and business deals. He had worked at the Wellington Mansion for almost 5 years now, and he had seen many parties like this one. He knew his place. He stayed in the background, did his job well, and never drew attention to himself. But tonight was different tonight. His eyes kept drifting toward the beautiful grand piano that sat in the center of the room. He had noticed it the moment it was brought in that afternoon, and something about it called to him in a way he could not explain. Samuel had a secret, one that he had never shared with anyone at the mansion. Long ago, in another life, he had been a musician as a young man. He had studied piano at a small music school in his neighborhood. His teachers had told him he had real talent, a gift that could take him far. He had dreamed of becoming a concert pianist, of playing on stages around the world. But life had other plans. His family had fallen on hard times, and Samuel had to quit school to work and help them survive. Over the years, his dreams faded, replaced by the daily struggle to pay bills and put food on the table. He took whatever jobs he could find, and eventually, he ended up as a janitor. His hands, which once danced across piano keys, now pushed mops and carried trash. But Samuel never forgot how to play. Even though he had not touched a piano in years, the music still lived inside him. Sometimes, late at night when he was alone, he would move his fingers as if playing invisible keys, remembering the melodies from his youth tonight. As he watched the guests fail at Marcus Wellington's challenge, something stirred in his heart. He saw how carelessly they approached the beautiful instrument, how they played without feeling or soul. It pained him to see such a magnificent piano treated like a toy. As Samuel pushed his cart closer to clean the area around the piano, he heard voices behind him. A group of young men in expensive suits stood nearby, holding drinks and laughing loudly. They had been drinking too much, and their voices carried across the room. "Look at this," one of them said, pointing at Samuel. "Even the janitor is getting close to the piano. Maybe he thinks he can play too." The others burst into laughter, finding the idea hilarious. "Yeah, right," another man said mockingly. "I bet he has never even seen a piano this expensive before. He probably thinks it is some kind of fancy table." Samuel heard every word, but he kept his face calm and continued his work. He had learned long ago not to react to such comments. People said cruel things when they thought someone was beneath them, and there was no point in getting angry, but inside his heart felt heavy, not because their words hurt his pride, but because they judged him without knowing anything about him. They saw only his uniform and the color of his skin, and they decided he was not worth their respect. A young woman in a sparkling gold dress joined the group of men. She giggled as she sipped her champagne. "Can you imagine?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A janitor playing that piano? That would be the funniest thing I have seen all year. He probably cannot even read music." The men laughed even harder, and one of them raised his voice intentionally so Samuel would hear. "Hey, old man, do you want to try the challenge? I am sure Mr. Wellington would love to see a janitor embarrass himself in front of everyone." They all roared with laughter, slapping each other on the back as if it were the greatest joke ever told. Samuel said nothing. He simply moved his cart a few feet away and continued dusting a nearby table. His hands were steady, and his expression remained neutral. But inside, emotions swirled like a storm. Part of him wanted to walk away and forget about the piano. to let these people have their fun and continue living in their world of judgment and ignorance. But another part of him, a part he had buried for many years, wanted to show them they were wrong, not to prove anything to them, but to honor the music that still lived in his soul. As the mocking continued, Marcus Wellington himself walked past the group. He had heard some of the laughter, but did not understand what it was about. He noticed Samuel cleaning nearby and gave him a brief nod, the kind of acknowledgement one gives to a servant, polite but distant. Marcus had no idea that the man pushing the cleaning cart had more musical talent in one finger than most of his wealthy guests had in their entire bodies. Samuel nodded back respectfully and watched as the billionaire returned to his guests. The night grew later, and slowly the mockery faded as the group moved on to other entertainment. But something had changed in Samuel. A fire had been lit inside him, a fire that had been dormant for too long. He looked at the piano one more time, its beautiful curves and perfect keys calling to him like an old friend. He made a decision then, a decision that would change everything. He would wait for the right moment, and when it came, he would step out of the shadows and let his hands remember what they were born to do. The clock on the wall struck 11, and the party showed no signs of slowing down. The ballroom remained full of guests who danced, laughed, and enjoyed the endless flow of expensive champagne. The live band had taken a break, and soft recorded music played in the background, creating a relaxed atmosphere. Marcus Wellington stood near the large windows, talking with a group of important business partners about a new deal worth millions of dollars. The grand piano sat untouched in its place, a beautiful reminder of the challenge that no one had been able to win. Samuel had finished most of his cleaning duties for the evening. The floors were spotless, the tables were clear of empty glasses, and the hallways leading to the ballroom were neat and tidy. He had worked quietly and efficiently, as he always did, making sure everything was perfect without drawing any attention to himself. But even as he worked, his mind kept returning to the piano. He could feel something pulling at him, a force he could not ignore. It was as if the instrument itself was calling out to him, asking him to set it free from the careless hands that had touched it earlier. Samuel stood in the corner of the room. Holding his dustcloth and watching the crowd, most of the guests had forgotten about the piano challenge by now. They were too busy enjoying themselves, too caught up in their own conversations and concerns. No one was paying attention to the janitor in the gray uniform, which was exactly how Samuel wanted it. He took a deep breath and made his decision. His heart beat faster as he set down his cleaning supplies and slowly walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy with meaning, as if he were walking toward his destiny. As he approached the instrument, a few people noticed him but did not think much of it. They assumed he was there to clean the piano or adjust something. After all, what else would a janitor be doing near it? Samuel stood beside the piano for a moment. Running his hand gently along its smooth surface, the wood was cool to the touch and perfectly polished. He could see his own reflection in the glossy black finish, the face of an old man who had lived a hard life but had never lost the music in his soul. He closed his eyes and remembered the days when he was young, when his fingers flew across the keys and music poured out of him like water from a fountain. Samuel walked around to the bench and sat down slowly. His movements were careful and deliberate. As if he were performing a sacred ritual, he adjusted the bench slightly, positioned himself at the right distance from the keys, and placed his hands in his lap. For a few seconds, he simply sat there, breathing deeply and letting the memories wash over him. It had been so many years since he had played on a real piano, so many years since he had allowed himself to be a musician instead of just a worker. Fear crept into his mind. What if he had forgotten how to play? What if his hands were too old, too tired? What if he embarrassed himself in front of all these people? But then Samuel remembered why he was doing this. It was not for the guests, not for Marcus Wellington, and not to win any challenge. It was for himself, for the young man he used to be, for the dreams he had been forced to abandon, and for the music that still lived inside him after all these years. He opened his eyes and looked down at the white and black keys. They seemed to glow under the chandelier lights, waiting patiently for someone who truly understood them. Samuel lifted his hands and gently placed his fingers on the keys. The touch felt familiar, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. He pressed down softly on one key, then another, testing the sound and feeling the vibration travel through his fingertips. The piano had a beautiful tone, rich and clear, exactly what he expected from such a magnificent instrument. A few more people in the crowd noticed him now. Their conversations quieted as they turned to look. Some seemed confused, others curious, wondering what the janitor was doing sitting at the billionaire's prized piano. One of the men who had mocked Samuel earlier nudged his friend and pointed. "Look, the janitor actually sat down at the piano," he said with a smirk. "This should be entertaining. I wonder how badly he will mess it up." Several people nearby heard the comment and turned to watch. Some smiled with amusement, expecting to witness something awkward or funny. They had no idea what was about to happen. They could not have imagined that the quiet man in the gray uniform sitting before them was about to take them on a musical journey they would never forget. Marcus Wellington was still talking with his business associates when someone tapped him on the shoulder. "Marcus, you might want to see this," the person said, pointing toward the piano. Marcus turned and saw Samuel sitting at the bench. His first reaction was confusion. He did not remember inviting the janitor to play, and he wondered if this was some kind of mistake. But before he could say anything or walk over to stop him, Samuel began to play. The first notes came out soft and gentle, like raindrops falling on leaves. The sound filled the room with a sweetness that made people stop talking and turn their heads. Samuel's fingers moved slowly at first, reacquainting themselves with the feel of the keys, remembering the patterns and movements from long ago. But with each passing second, his confidence grew. His hands began to move with more purpose, more strength, and more passion. The gentle melody started to build, growing richer and more complex. The room fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Every glass was set down, and every eye turned toward the piano. People stood frozen in place, watching in disbelief as the janitor's hands danced across the keys with grace and skill. His fingers moved with incredible speed and precision, pressing the keys with just the right amount of force to create the perfect sound. The music flowed from the piano like a river, sometimes calm and peaceful, sometimes powerful and dramatic. Samuel played with his eyes half closed, lost in the music, his whole body swaying gently with the rhythm. The guests could not believe what they were hearing. This was not the clumsy playing they had witnessed earlier from the other challengers. This was real music, the kind that reaches deep into your heart and touches your soul. Some people felt tears forming in their eyes without knowing why. Others felt goosebumps rise on their arms as the beautiful melody washed over them. Marcus Wellington stood completely still, his mouth slightly open, staring at Samuel with an expression of pure shock and wonder. The man in the gray uniform, the one they had all ignored and mocked, was playing like a master, like someone who had been born to make music. Samuel's fingers moved across the piano keys like lightning, creating sounds that seemed impossible for one person to produce. The music grew stronger and more powerful with each passing moment, filling every corner of the grand ballroom with its beauty. He was no longer playing simple melodies or gentle tunes. He was performing one of the most difficult and famous piano pieces ever written, a composition that only the greatest pianists in the world dared to attempt. His hands crossed over each other in complex patterns, his left hand providing deep, thundering bass notes while his right hand created delicate dancing melodies high on the keyboard. The guests stood mesmerized, their eyes wide with amazement. Many of them had attended expensive concerts and opera houses. They had heard famous musicians perform in the finest theaters across Europe and America. But there was something different about this moment, something raw and authentic that touched them in ways they had never experienced before. This was not a professional performer playing for money or fame. This was a man pouring his entire soul into the music, playing as if his life depended on it, playing as if this might be his last chance to let the world hear the music that had been trapped inside him for decades. The young men who had mocked Samuel earlier now stood in shocked silence. Their smiles had disappeared, replaced by expressions of disbelief and shame. The woman in the gold dress who had laughed at the idea of a janitor playing piano now had tears streaming down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the emotion of the music. One of the businessmen whispered to his companion, "This is impossible. How can a janitor play like this? Where did he learn?" but his friend could only shake his head. Equally confused and amazed, Marcus Wellington moved closer to the piano. Pushing gently through the crowd of guests, he needed to see this with his own eyes, needed to confirm that what he was hearing was really coming from the hands of his janitor. As he approached, he could see Samuel's face. His eyes were closed now, and a peaceful expression had settled over his features. It was as if he had been transported to another world, a world where there was no pain, no struggle, no prejudice, only pure music. Marcus felt something stir deep in his chest, an emotion he had not felt in years. He realized he was witnessing something truly special, something that money could never buy. The music shifted again, moving from powerful and dramatic to soft and heartbreaking. Samuel played a section that sounded like a conversation between two voices, one asking questions and the other providing gentle answers. His fingers pressed the keys with such tenderness that some guests felt as if they were listening to someone's deepest secrets being whispered. An elderly woman in a diamond necklace wiped tears from her eyes and turned to her husband. "In all my years, I have never heard anything so beautiful," she said in a trembling voice. Her husband nodded, unable to speak, too moved by what he was hearing. Samuel's hands moved faster again, building toward something magnificent. The music climbed higher and higher, like a bird soaring toward the sun. His fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed, creating cascades of notes that sparkled like stars in the night sky. The guests held their breath, afraid that any sound they made might break the spell. The chandelier lights seemed to flicker in time with the music, and the very air in the room felt charged with electricity. This was more than just a piano performance. It was a transformation, a moment when art reached its highest form. As Samuel approached the climax of the piece, his entire body moved with the music. He leaned forward and backward, his shoulders rising and falling, his head tilting as he listened to every note he created. Sweat appeared on his forehead, not from nervousness, but from the physical and emotional intensity of the performance. His fingers struck the keys with perfect precision, never missing a single note despite the incredible speed and complexity. The music built to a thundering crescendo, with both hands pounding the piano in perfect harmony, creating a sound so powerful that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Then suddenly the music changed one final time. After all the power and intensity, Samuel brought it down to something quiet and peaceful. Like the calm after a storm, his right hand played a simple, beautiful melody while his left hand provided gentle support. The contrast was stunning, and it made the emotional impact even stronger. Some guests were crying openly now, not caring who saw them. Others stood with their hands clasped together as if in prayer, moved beyond words by what they were experiencing. Marcus Wellington found himself thinking about his own life, about all the years he had spent chasing money and power. He had everything a person could want: wealth, influence, respect. But when was the last time he had felt something real? Something that made him feel truly alive? This janitor, this man he had barely noticed in 5 years, was giving him a gift more valuable than anything money could buy. He was reminding him what it meant to be human, what it meant to create something beautiful just for the sake of beauty itself. The final notes of the piece approached, and Samuel played them with such delicacy that they seemed to float in the air like feathers. His hands slowed down, playing softer and softer, until finally he pressed the last key. The note hung in the air for a long moment, gradually fading into silence. Samuel kept his hands on the keys for a few seconds, his eyes still closed, not ready to leave the world of music and return to reality. The room remained completely silent. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Then slowly, Samuel lifted his hands from the piano and opened his eyes. He looked down at his weathered hands, these hands that had scrubbed floors and carried trash for so many years, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done it. He had played again. He had proven to himself that the musician inside him was not dead, just sleeping, and for a few precious minutes, he had been alive in a way he had not felt since he was young. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Samuel sat at the piano, wondering if he should stand up and quietly return to his work, wondering if the guests were too shocked or too uncomfortable to respond. But then, from somewhere in the crowd, someone began to clap. The single clap echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot, breaking the spell that had held everyone frozen in place. Then another person joined in, and another, and suddenly the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. The sound was deafening, wave after wave of clapping that seemed to go on forever. Guests who moments ago had been standing still were now shouting and cheering, their faces filled with joy and amazement. Some people stamped their feet on the marble floor, adding to the noise. Others raised their hands high above their heads as they clapped, showing their appreciation in every way they could. Samuel sat at the piano bench, completely overwhelmed by the response. He had expected silence, perhaps polite applause at best, or maybe even anger from Marcus Wellington for touching his precious piano without permission. But this outpouring of emotion and appreciation was something he had never imagined. He slowly stood up from the bench, his legs feeling weak beneath him, and turned to face the crowd. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. The applause continued, growing even louder as people realized he was standing. Marcus Wellington was the first to move forward, pushing through the crowd of guests with determination on his face. His eyes were red, and there were visible tear tracks on his cheeks, something none of his guests had ever seen before. The powerful billionaire who never showed weakness, who always maintained perfect control, had been moved to tears by a janitor's piano performance. He reached Samuel and stood before him, looking into the older man's eyes with an expression of deep respect and wonder. For a long moment he simply stared, as if seeing Samuel for the first time. "What is your name?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. Even though he had seen Samuel working in his mansion for 5 years, Samuel hesitated. Surprised by the question, "Samuel Carter." "Sir," he replied quietly, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Marcus nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. "Samuel Carter," he repeated. "Where did you learn to play like that? I have never, in all my years, heard anything so extraordinary." Samuel looked down at his feet, suddenly feeling uncomfortable with all the attention. "I studied music when I was young, sir, a long time ago, before life took me in other directions." The applause finally began to fade as people waited to hear the conversation between the billionaire and the janitor. Marcus placed his hand on Samuel's shoulder, a gesture he would never normally make to someone he considered a servant. "You did not just study music," Marcus said firmly. "You mastered it. What you just played was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most difficult pieces ever written. I know because I have heard it performed by some of the greatest pianists alive, and not one of them played it with the soul and passion you just showed us." Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. He had not expected Marcus to recognize the piece, much less to praise his performance so highly. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to hear what was being said. The woman in the gold dress, who had mocked Samuel earlier, pushed her way forward. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and her hands shook as she reached out toward him. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I said terrible things about you. I judged you without knowing anything about you. Please forgive me." Samuel looked at her with kind eyes and nodded gently. "There is nothing to forgive," he said softly. "You did not know." But the woman shook her head, tears flowing freely down her face. "That is no excuse," she said. "I should never judge anyone based on their job or appearance. You have taught me something important tonight." One by one, the men who had laughed at Samuel earlier also came forward. Their faces showed genuine shame and regret. "We were cruel," one of them admitted, looking down at his expensive shoes. "We made fun of you because we thought we were better than you. But you have more talent in one finger than we have in our entire bodies. We are the ones who should be embarrassed, not you." Samuel accepted their apologies with grace, showing no anger or bitterness. "Music does not care about social status," he said simply. "It only cares about the heart of the person playing." The elderly woman with the diamond necklace approached next, but instead of apologizing, she had questions. "You said you studied music when you were young," she said gently. "What happened? Why are you working as a janitor instead of performing on the world's greatest stages?" Samuel took a deep breath before answering. "The memory's painful but necessary to share. My family fell on hard times when I was in my 20s, he explained. My father got sick and we had medical bills to pay. My mother worked 2 jobs, but it was not enough. I had to drop out of music school and find work to help support them. By the time things got better, too many years had passed. I had responsibilities, bills, and no money to return to my studies, so I did what I had to do. I worked." The room fell silent again as people absorbed his words. Many of them had been born into wealth and privilege. They had never had to make such impossible choices, had never had to give up their dreams just to survive. Suddenly they saw Samuel not as a janitor, but as a man who had sacrificed everything for his family, a man of honor and strength who had buried his gifts in order to do what was right. The contrast between his character and their earlier mockery made many of them feel deeply ashamed. Marcus Wellington's face had gone pale as he listened. 5 years, he said quietly. You have worked in my home for 5 years, and I never once asked about your life, your dreams, or your talents. I never looked beyond your uniform. He turned to address the entire crowd, raising his voice so everyone could hear. We all did the same thing. We saw what we expected to see, and we never looked deeper. This man has been invisible to us, not because he was hiding, but because we chose not to see him. The words hung heavy in the air, making everyone uncomfortable but also awakened. The atmosphere in the ballroom had completely transformed. What had started as a party full of superficial conversations and false smiles had become something real and meaningful. People looked at each other differently now, questioned their own prejudices and assumptions. The music Samuel had played had not only moved their hearts, but had also opened their eyes to their own failures as human beings. Samuel stood in the center of it all, humble and quiet, not seeking glory or revenge, just grateful that he had been able to play music one more time. He had reminded himself and everyone else that some things, like art and beauty and human dignity, cannot be bought or sold. They exist in the soul, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Marcus Wellington stood before Samuel, his mind racing with thoughts and emotions he had not felt in decades. The billionaire had built his empire on logic and careful calculation, but what he had just witnessed defied all logic. How could someone with such extraordinary talent be content working as a janitor? How could such a gift remain hidden for so long? These questions troubled him deeply, and he knew he had to do something about it. He raised his hand to silence the crowd, which had begun talking among themselves about Samuel's incredible performance. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, his voice strong and clear. Tonight I made a promise. I said that anyone who could truly move me with their playing would be rewarded. Samuel Carter has not only moved me, he has changed me. The crowd grew quiet. Sensing that something important was about to happen, Marcus turned to face Samuel directly, looking him in the eyes with genuine respect. Samuel, I am a man of my word, and I intend to honor the promise I made tonight. But first, I need to know something. Do you still love music? Do you still dream of playing? Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. No one had asked him that question in over 30 years. He had buried those dreams so deep that he thought they were dead. But tonight had proven they were only sleeping. Yes, sir, he answered honestly, his voice barely above a whisper. Music has never left my heart. Not for a single day. Marcus nodded, a small smile appearing on his face for the first time that evening. Then I have a question for you, he said. If you could have anything in the world, if money and circumstances were not obstacles, what would you want? The question caught Samuel off guard. He had spent so many years just surviving, just making it through each day, that he had stopped allowing himself to dream. He looked down at his weathered hands, the hands that had just played the most difficult piano piece ever written, the hands that scrubbed floors and carried cleaning supplies. Could these hands have another chance? Could he dare to hope for something more? He looked back up at Marcus, and in that moment, something inside him broke free. I would want to play music again, he said, his voice growing stronger. Not for fame or money, but because it is who I am. I would want to share what I have with others, to teach young people who love music the way I do, to help them avoid making the same sacrifices I had to make. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to Samuel's words. Here was a man who had lost everything, who had every reason to be bitter and angry, yet all he wanted was to give back to others. The billionaire had met thousands of people in his life. Powerful CEOs, famous politicians, brilliant scientists, but none of them had impressed him as much as this humble janitor standing before him. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He quickly sent a text message to his personal assistant, who was somewhere in the mansion. Then he turned back to Samuel and the waiting crowd. Samuel Carter, Marcus said formally, as if making an official announcement. I am offering you a full scholarship to any music school in the world. I will pay for your tuition, your living expenses, and everything you need to complete your education. Furthermore, I will establish a foundation in your name, the Samuel Carter Music Foundation, dedicated to helping young musicians from poor backgrounds pursue their dreams. You will be the director of this foundation, and you will have the resources to help hundreds of young people avoid the painful choice you had to make. The crowd gasped in collective surprise. Several people began clapping immediately, but Marcus held up his hand to show he was not finished. "But that is not all," he continued, turning to address both Samuel and the guests. "I am also giving you this piano, the one you just played. Consider it a gift from someone who finally understands that real value has nothing to do with money." Samuel's legs almost gave out beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the piano to steady himself, unable to process what he was hearing. A full scholarship, a foundation in his name. The piano, it was too much. More than he had ever dreamed possible, sir. "I cannot accept this," Samuel stammered, his voice shaking. "It is too generous. I am just a janitor. I do not deserve such gifts." But Marcus shook his head firmly, placing both hands on Samuel's shoulders. "You are not just a janitor," he said with conviction. "You are a master musician who was forced by circumstances to hide his light. Tonight you reminded all of us what true talent looks like, what sacrifice means, and what really matters in life. If anyone deserves these gifts, it is you. Besides," Marcus added with a slight smile, "I am a businessman, and I know a good investment when I see one. The world needs to hear your music, and young people need a teacher like you." The elderly woman with the diamond necklace stepped forward, wiping tears from her eyes. "Marcus is right," she said in a trembling voice. "My husband and I would like to contribute to this foundation as well. We will donate $500,000 to help get it started." Her husband nodded in agreement. Pulling out his checkbook immediately, other guests began stepping forward too, each one offering to contribute money, connections, or resources to help Samuel's foundation succeed within minutes. Pledges totaling over $3 million had been made. Samuel stood in stunned silence, watching as these wealthy strangers, some of whom had mocked him just hours earlier, now competed to help him. The woman in the gold dress approached with an envelope. "My father owns a concert hall downtown," she said softly, still ashamed of her earlier behavior. "I want to organize a debut concert for you, free of charge. We will invite music critics, journalists, and everyone who matters in the classical music world. They need to hear you play." One of the young men who had laughed at Samuel earlier spoke up as well. "I work in media and marketing," he said. "I will handle all the publicity for your foundation and your concerts, no fee. Consider it my way of making amends for my ignorance." Marcus Wellington watched as his guests rallied around Samuel, and he felt something he had not experienced in years. Pride in his fellow human beings, tonight had started as just another party, another chance for wealthy people to show off and make business connections. But Samuel's music had transformed it into something meaningful, something that would actually make a difference in the world. The billionaire realized that this was the real reward, not the money or the applause, but the opportunity to do something good, something that mattered. Samuel finally found his voice again, though it was thick with emotion. "I do not know what to say," he admitted, looking around at all the faces watching him with kindness and respect. "A few hours ago I was invisible to all of you. Now you are offering me more than I ever dreamed possible. I am grateful, more grateful than words can express. But I want you all to know that I did not play tonight for reward or recognition. I played because the music demanded to be heard, because I needed to remember who I was before life forced me to forget." Marcus nodded in understanding. "That is exactly why you deserve everything we are offering you," he said. "You played for the right reasons, you played with your soul, and now the world will finally get to hear what we heard tonight." The party continued long into the night, but it had transformed into something completely different from what it had been before. The atmosphere was no longer about showing off wealth or making business deals. Instead, people gathered in small groups, talking about art, dreams, and second chances. Samuel found himself surrounded by guests who wanted to hear his story, to learn about his journey, and to tell him how his music had touched them. He answered their questions with humility and grace, still struggling to believe that this was really happening. Marcus Wellington excused himself from the crowd and made his way to his private study on the second floor of the mansion. He needed a moment alone to think about everything that had happened. He sat down in his leather chair and stared out the window at the city lights below. For years, he had measured success by the size of his bank account, the number of properties he owned, and the power he wielded in business circles. But tonight, a janitor had shown him a different kind of wealth, the wealth of talent, passion, and integrity. Marcus realized that in his pursuit of money, he had become blind to the truly valuable things in life. He picked up his phone and made several calls. First, He contacted his lawyer and instructed him to begin the paperwork for the Samuel Carter Music Foundation immediately. He wanted everything legally established within a week. Next, he called the dean of the most prestigious music conservatory in the country, waking him up despite the late hour. "I have someone you need to hear," Marcus told the dean. "A musician who will change the way you think about talent and education. I want him admitted to your school with full honors, and I will personally fund his entire education, plus a generous stipend for living expenses." The dean, knowing Marcus Wellington's reputation and wealth, agreed to arrange an audition. Marcus then called his accountant and instructed him to transfer $10 million into a special account for the foundation. "$10 million, sir," the accountant repeated, making sure he had heard correctly. "For a janitor," Marcus smiled at the question. "No," he corrected. "For a master musician who happens to work as a janitor, there is a difference. And tonight I learned what that difference means." After finishing his calls, Marcus sat back in his chair and felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. For once, his money was going to do something truly meaningful. Back in the ballroom, Samuel was having an emotional conversation with a young woman who had approached him nervously. She was the daughter of one of the guests, a college student who had been forced by her parents to study business even though her passion was art. "Your performance gave me courage," she told Samuel with tears in her eyes. "I have been afraid to tell my parents that I want to leave business school and pursue my real dreams. But watching you tonight, seeing how you never lost your gift even after all these years, it made me realize that I cannot give up on what I love. Life is too short to live someone else's dream." Samuel took her hands in his and looked at her kindly. "Then you must be brave," he told her. "I gave up my dreams because I had no choice. My family needed me to survive, but if you have a choice, if you have the opportunity to follow your heart, then you must take it. Do not make my mistake of waiting until you are old to reclaim what is yours. Live your truth now. While you are young and full of energy." The young woman hugged Samuel tightly, thanking him through her tears. Her parents, who had been watching from across the room, approached with conflicting emotions on their faces. They had overheard the conversation. The girl's father, a stern-looking businessman, surprised everyone by speaking first. "Perhaps we have been too hard on you," he said to his daughter, his voice softer than usual. "Tonight has taught me that there are different kinds of success. If art is your passion, then maybe we should support that instead of forcing you down a path that makes you miserable." The girl's mother nodded in agreement. Also moved by Samuel's story, the young woman burst into fresh tears, this time tears of joy and relief, and hugged both her parents. Samuel watched the family reunion with a warm smile, realizing that his music had done more than just entertain, it had changed lives. As the clock struck 2 in the morning, many guests began to leave, but not before saying goodbye to Samuel and promising to support his foundation. They shook his hand with genuine respect, treating him not as a servant but as an honored guest. Some even asked for his autograph, predicting that he would soon be famous. Samuel accepted all of this attention with quiet dignity, still somewhat overwhelmed but deeply grateful. The woman in the gold dress approached him one last time before leaving. "I will never forget tonight," she said sincerely. "You have taught me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. I promise I will be a better person because of what you showed us." Marcus Wellington returned to the ballroom and found Samuel sitting alone at the piano, gently touching the keys but not playing. "Overwhelmed?" Marcus asked with a knowing smile. Samuel nodded. "I keep thinking I will wake up and discover this was all a dream," he admitted. Marcus sat down on the bench beside him, something that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. "It is not a dream," Marcus assured him. "By this time next week, you will be enrolled in music school. The foundation will be established, and your life will be completely different. But I want you to make me a promise." Samuel looked at the billionaire with curiosity. "What kind of promise, sir?" Marcus placed his hand on the piano. "Promise me that you will never again hide your talent. Promise me that you will play for anyone who wants to hear, regardless of their wealth or social status. Promise me that you will teach young musicians not just how to play, but how to play with soul and passion, the way you do. And most importantly, promise me that you will help other people find their second chances, the way we found yours tonight." Samuel felt tears welling up in his eyes as he listened to Marcus's words. "I promise," he said firmly, his voice strong despite his emotion. "I will spend the rest of my life honoring this gift you have given me. I will help as many young musicians as I can, And I will never forget where I came from or the people who believed in me when I was invisible." Marcus extended his hand, and Samuel shook it. The handshake between the billionaire and the janitor sealed a promise that would change countless lives in the years to come. As the last guest departed and the mansion grew quiet, Samuel prepared to leave as well, but Marcus stopped him. "You are no longer my employee," he said gently. "You are my friend and my partner in this foundation. Your uniform stays here. Tonight is the last night you work as a janitor. Tomorrow, you begin your new life as a musician and teacher." Samuel removed his gray uniform jacket and laid it carefully on a chair. It felt like shedding an old skin. The morning sun rose over the city, painting the sky with soft pink and gold. At Marcus Wellington's mansion, a quiet sense of hope filled the air. Samuel Carter arrived for what he thought would be another day of work, but it was different this time. He wore simple clothes, not his usual uniform, and carried nothing but a sense of gratitude in his heart. Marcus greeted Samuel at the door, smiling warmly. "Today is your first day as a musician and teacher," Marcus said. "The world is waiting to hear your music." Samuel nodded, still not quite believing how much his life had changed overnight. Inside the mansion's music room, a crowd had gathered. It was not the wealthy guests from last night, but young children from nearby neighborhoods. Their faces were full of excitement and curiosity. Some brought notebooks. Others held small instruments of their own. They had come for the first lesson of the Samuel Carter Music Foundation. Samuel stood before them, feeling both nervous and honored. He remembered the promise he made to Marcus, to share his talent and help others find their dreams. Samuel sat at his gifted grand piano and played a welcoming tune. The children listened, their eyes shining with wonder. For many, it was the first time they had ever heard live piano music. Samuel knew how much it meant to them. He spoke in simple words, teaching them how to find the right notes and feel the music in their hearts. The children laughed and tried their best, some struggling but never giving up. Samuel encouraged them gently, reminding them that true talent came from practice and love, not just from being born gifted. News of Samuel's foundation and his story spread quickly through the city. Local newspapers published articles about the billionaire's party and the janitor who amazed everyone with his music. People who had never cared about classical music found themselves curious and inspired. Other music schools sent invitations, hoping to work together with the new foundation. Samuel received hundreds of letters from families who wanted their children to learn from him. Many donors joined Marcus and other guests to fund scholarships and buy instruments for students who lacked money. Samuel performed a small concert at the downtown hall offered by the woman in the gold dress. The seats were filled with children, parents, teachers, and music fans. Samuel began with simple songs so everyone could follow along, then played challenging pieces to inspire the audience. Each note he played seemed to tell a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. The applause at the end was warm and genuine, not just for the music, but for the journey Samuel had taken. Over the next year, the Samuel Carter Music Foundation helped dozens of young musicians. Samuel became known as not only a teacher, but also a mentor who understood hardship. He made time for every student, listening to their stories and giving them advice about music and life. Many of his students came from poor families, exactly as Samuel had hoped. The foundation gave them a chance to chase their passion. Samuel knew what poverty felt like and refused to let money be the reason any child gave up on their dream. Marcus Wellington visited the foundation often, but always as a quiet supporter and friend. The billionaire watched with pride as his gift turned into a legacy. He saw how one act of kindness had transformed not just Samuel, but an entire community. Samuel and Marcus became partners in purpose rather than boss and servant. Together, they planned more concerts, workshops, and outreach programs so that every child could experience the magic of music. Their work inspired other wealthy people to look for hidden talent and help those who needed a second chance. Samuel looked back on his journey and realized that greatness can be found anywhere. He had spent decades in silence, but inside his heart, the music had survived. Now, as he played his piano for children born into difficult worlds, he brought joy and possibility to everyone who listened. He never forgot where he started, and he never let a day go by without helping someone else discover their own unique gift. As the sun set on another day, Samuel closed the door to the music room, feeling at peace for the first time in many years. His life had changed forever, and because he was brave enough to answer the call of the piano, hundreds of others would get the chance to create their own masterpiece. The story of the janitor who played like a genius was just the beginning. For Samuel and everyone touched by his music, the real journey, all the new beginnings and dreams, had only just begun.